How are we, folks? It's been some run, but as you know, today will be our final Thursday pod before Murray, Bernard and myself switch to a members exclusive format from Monday, when we'll begin the big build up to England at Twickenham. Over the last 3 years, we've been lucky enough to have an audience of thousands join us every Thursday. And there's no sugarcoating the fact that when we made the call to make the pod members exclusive to ensure its viability into the future, we were concerned that we might lose a large chunk of that community. But seeing the sheer number of you who have backed what we're doing and have become members of the 42 over the last fortnight or so has been unbelievably gratifying. And we can't wait now to kick this on into the new chapter. Bernard Jackman and Murray Kinsella on the way, but before I bring in the two lads, I just wanted to very quickly field a few questions on the new Monday pod from prospective members. Brendan Cunningham writes, "Lads, is this all a ruse so that Gavin can finally complete his dream of waxing lyrical about Rupeni Thathanibuka for 45 minutes to an hour without the boys interrupting him?" Brendan, I reject the premise of your question, okay? But yes, Alan Dooney on Twitter, "Gav's impassioned reasoning from the other week has convinced me, so I'm going to sign up. Can I listen to the pods on my usual podcast app? I quite like speeding them up." And yes, Alan, the members' pods are made available on, I would say, 99% of podcast apps once you sign up. And look, we'll try and hurry things up in future for you, okay? And lastly, here's one on email from B.Jackman. "Will members have the option to vote for a new presenter?" I thought these had been vetted actually, but you know what? I'm just going to reply to that one personally. But in the meantime, there is a 20% discount on an annual membership of the 42 if you join us before our big show on Monday. Visit members.the42.ie and use the promo code the42ORW, all caps, all one word, the 42ORW. Now, here's your final Thursday episode of Rugby Weekly. You're very welcome to Rugby Weekly. Murray, how's tricks?
Good, Gav. How are you?
I am splendid. Thank you very much. Birch, good to see you. How are you?
Yeah, excellent. Thanks. Excellent.
We've got loads coming up. I've made a note because I'm usually bad at like the intro part where we forward sell what we're going to be talking about. And today we've got loads to get into. We're going to kind of bypass the Italy game. Let's move on with their lives and talk about slightly more interesting things. High tackles, red cards, the supposed ruination of the game. We're going to focus a little bit on France as well, the makeup of their national team, but also transfers in the club game over there, how they can benefit the little guy, some moves closer to home, player pathways, alternative player pathways, and we'll get into the provinces as well towards the end of the show. But we do have to start, Murray, with the loss of Andrew Porter for Twickenham. We had a question that we were going to lead with from Kieran Pearson, one of our members, about how Ireland can actually beat England. And this makes the task really harder, doesn't it? It's not just lip service to say that. It actually makes the job a lot harder for Ireland.
It sure does. He's been absolutely excellent since moving across to Loosehead. His power, his ability to link pass, his just dynamism around the pitch, work rate, mobility, they're all massive points of difference for Ireland, really. And it's 2/3 now of that front row that we were singing the praises of throughout November and into this Six Nations, now ruled out through injury with Ronan Kelleher missing. Obviously, we've seen Dan Sheehan step up impressively at hooker, and that's been a positive, but it is a blow. Like, there's no two ways about it. To lose one of your key guys before going to Twickenham against a pack and a team that does have a bit of power themselves, and it's probably relying on that a little bit at the moment to stay competitive. So yeah, a blow, disappointing for him. Haven't heard how long it's going to be, but Leinster obviously will be hopeful it's not going to be a long-term thing. Ireland haven't, as we speak, called up any replacement players, so it's going to be Dave Kilcoyne and Cian Healy stepping into those slots. They've both come off the bench in this Six Nations, and they'll both feel they have a point to prove. It'll be fascinating to see which way Farrell uses them. We've talked about having impact off the bench, and perhaps Kilcoyne offers that, but he has been in good form with Munster as well. So I suppose if you're looking for the bright side, it's the fact that those guys get back in, get a big start, one of them under their belts, and the other, you would presume, a good hefty stint off the bench.
I know, Birch, you'd have loyalty in all of your teammates no matter what, but even if you were Dan Sheehan, who's come in more recently, or if you were Tyke Furlong and you're looking across from you, do you kind of feel an added pressure on yourself, and do you feel the loss of somebody who is as dominant as yourself almost?
Yeah, no, I think it's a big blow to Ireland. Porter's become an absolute key player. Sheen had a great game against Italy, but I worry about the loss of Kelleher really as a scrummaging hooker, and that's going to put pressure on whoever comes in at loosehead. And look, we're very lucky. We have two incredibly experienced backup looseheads in Kilcoyne and Healy. Worryingly, it's not really clear who the next guy up is, in terms of being able to be someone who's going to be in an Irish squad for 10 years. There's a lot of loose heads floating around, but none of them have shown yet the real, I suppose, ability to come and step up. Eric O'Sullivan obviously looked like he was a really bright prospect and still is, but hasn't got to that level yet. So it is going to be interesting. I think they may start Healy and bring Kilcoyne off the bench. And I know people might say, oh, well, Kilcoyne was ahead of Healy last week, but I don't think so really. I think, that was Italy that was trying to get more guys in the wider squad, some game time. So it is a blow to Ireland, and it shows once again how we really need to get depth, and that has to be the priority in the summer is to find another player in most positions who can come in and step in and not have a huge difference back in terms of performance.
We know as well the conversation around starters and replacements has probably shifted over the last few years, Murray. So part of me wants to ask you, which way would you lean in terms of who would you start as Porter's replacement? But there are all sorts of strategic connotations and permutations that Andy Farrell will be running through his head, such as like if Cian Healy can hold his own, which I'm sure he can for an hour. Dave Kilcoyne is a very handy guy to bring off the bench against tired legs. But which way would you go, or how would you be thinking about it if I asked you to put your coaching hat on?
I probably would be leaning that way just because it's probably what I know, what I've seen with Ireland, Cian Healy being that next in line there. And as you say, having been in those situations loads of times, as has Kilcoyne, like neither of them are obviously very young props, fresh to test rugby, but it is another step down your depth chart. Absolutely. I probably would be leaning towards going with Healy at the start, given his familiarity with those kind of tough tests away from home and the pressure that's going to be there and set piece. But as I said, Kilcoyne has been doing really well on that front, and his carrying, I think, has been a bit punchier in the last couple of months as well. It's been great to see from a Munster point of view, so there'll be absolutely no issues with going either way. Birch is right, the issue is probably behind that and what's coming next. It's a longer term one, and I've no doubt we'll be returning to it. It just flags it all again. Like once you get one of your key guys injured, that's when things get exposed and brought to the surface. So yeah, you're hoping that this doesn't happen for Ireland in a World Cup situation where they're heading for a quarter final. As we've seen before, it's been really damaging to lose key guys like that.
I know, Bert, we're going to get into it for members on our first ever Monday pod as we begin to run into Twickenham, how Ireland go about winning this game. But just answer Kieran's question from this early juncture. And it kind of feels to me a little bit like the 2018 game. I know Ireland are very different. England have kind of moved on, but just because they seem to be lacking some of their power guys, like Manu Tuilagi isn't part of their training squad, it just has a couple of... it has me reminiscent of that a little bit, in that it feels as though conditionally it's set up for Ireland to do okay here. I don't know, is it an ancestral thing or whatever? I wouldn't necessarily fear England, but I know they can do me harm, if that makes sense. So for all the talk of Ireland not fearing them, like it's still a seismic enough task, I just feel kind of confident.
Yeah, I'm look, we should be confident because our performances have been better than England's, but I worry that England are just one performance away from clicking. And I know there's a lot of Eddie Jones bashers, and there's all kinds of rumours that if they finish fourth or fifth again, he mightn't see it out to the World Cup. But I think there's some talent in that squad, and I think the challenge for us is looking at that game. Is effectively our attacking breakdown and England's defensive breakdown. So they've actually been very hard on the ball, over the last couple of games since effectively John Mitchell left. There's been a focus on the jackal, which is unusual because their new defensive coach is is ex-rugby league. It's come in from the Brisbane Broncos, and usually defence coaches who come in from league, their first job in union isn't really focused on the breakdown. It's more around connections, double hits, line speed, etc. So it's been quite interesting to see that, and also when you look at Ireland's penalty count. It's quite paradoxical that we're actually giving away more penalties on attack than we are on defence, which is quite strange. So even though our breakdown is super quick, Italy, in fairness, was a little bit unusual in that there was a lot of there's a few penalties for double movement, for rolling on the ground. But I think it's an area that Ireland need to tighten up, because in Twickenham, if you're sloppy at the attacking ruck, their set piece can do a job on you, and that'll give them a chance to kick up the line and bring their forwards into play. So I'm sure Paul O'Connell and Mike Catt that'll be a big work on for us. And for me, that puts a little bit of fear in me in terms of, it's not a foregone conclusion that we're going to win.
Murray, as I say, we'll dig into it on Monday. I think we've loads more to talk about, including high tackles and red cards, and conversation about the game being destroyed either by red cards or by, as some people see it, the softening of it. And loads of incidents over the weekend, both in the Six Nations, in Connacht's game. We saw Ruan Nels hit on Conor Fitzgerald. I'm not exactly sure where to start, but you made a very good point in our WhatsApp group during the week, which is kind of what made us think it would be worth discussing, which is that, like, there's such a dichotomy between how people within the game, quote unquote, see some of these incidents, it would appear, and those outside of it, per se, in terms of media, fans, just spectators, whatever. It feels like this week that difference has been highlighted more so than in recent times. And I know this does rear its head every so often. We've had conversations about it on the pod in the past, but it just feels heightened at the moment, doesn't it?
Yeah, it sure does. Like, it's fascinating that immediately after the game with the Hame Faiva incident, like, Peter O'Mahony had a lot of empathy, sympathy for it. Like, he's clearly not of the view that it's worth a red card. I think that's what he was intimating anyway, that there's no intention there, and that it's tough for players. He's obviously been in the situation a few times with those kind of issues, I suppose. And even on the Faiva incident, like, there's people I've spoken to who don't think it's a red card. He's obviously had a 4-week ban now, and Italy themselves and Faiva argued that it wasn't a red card in the disciplinary hearing, which again is kind of, it raised my eyebrows a little bit, because you think, just take the hit. He would have got a shorter ban. He could have even potentially been back, couldn't he, if he'd taken a 3-week suspension, done the coaching intervention. He counts one of the club games because he could have argued that he needed fitness and needed match freshness to come back. So he could have been back for the end of the Six Nations, but they argued that it wasn't a red card. And you've seen that actually a number of times, really, and you see it in the disciplinary report, and you're usually surprised. Also on the outside, I think supporters and media have thoroughly got our heads around the fact that there has to be a change in rugby with regards to head contact, because of what's happening with former players, with lawsuits, with the optics of, people being worried to get into rugby, that kind of thing, which maybe is overstated at times, but is a serious issue for rugby at the very same time. So, yeah, I think there is a little bit of a divide about how this is being treated from those kind of inside the game, including some referees, in my experience as well, and thinking, this is really tough for us. We don't want to be given these red cards. The players clearly don't agree, in a kind of general sense. I am generalizing there. And also on the outside, I think now any sort of high or close to headshot there's instant demands for a red from the outside, which has been a real transformation in the last few years. So it is a fascinating one. And even incidents after the game, like the Ryan Baird ones, caused a lot of debate and discussion this week. In the past, it wouldn't have been a talking point, really. Everyone would have just moved on, probably not even noticed it. So there has been a shift, but it's almost like those in the game still have to take that final step with it.
Yeah, I've no doubt it's more difficult for them to make that shift, in fairness, Bernard. Yeah, of course. They're the ones actually having to apply the change. We're simply watching it, right?
Yeah, and I know it's not easy, but it has to change. And look at, I think players will show empathy for another player, post game, particularly what happened with Italy having to go to 13 men and all that stuff. But I think that the message has to be that we got to make the game safer. I think World Rugby, they have the right idea, but unfortunately they're not being strong enough in terms of protecting referees. and there's too much inconsistency. So I think that my personal opinion is referees are looking for mitigation too quickly, and hence players sometimes see violent collisions being punished only with a yellow card. And I would take the Stormers hit. For me, that was more dangerous than the one in the Italy game. But yeah, it was only a yellow card. Now I know he's been cited, but that's the problem for me, is that effectively sometimes you see, like even the Gilroy one against the Scarlets. I mean, that was a dangerous tackle, and yet it was a yellow card. And so the problem is when players see some incidents being yellow, some being red, they start to lose confidence in the judicial system as well, and they don't change their behaviours quickly enough. And look, behaviours will change. Be under no doubt, behaviours will change. Unfortunately, at the moment, we're in that sticky part, to use an Eddie Jones phrase, where it's kind of, we're stuck in the middle. We're not really sure how it looks or how we need to behave. Our players need to behave, and I think that the longer that goes on, the more World Rugby are going to be in trouble, because I think that, look, to a certain extent, they can plead ignorance to some extent with what the Steve Thompson generation, right, who are all suffering at the moment. But since that's come to light, and since all the research from the States has come to life about concussion, I think the reaction hasn't been strong enough. I know they have the right intention, but what we see on a weekly basis, even though there's been a spike in red cards, I don't think it's been enough. I don't think it's been enough to change players' behaviour. And until we get that changed, you're always going to have the accidental. You're always going to have the freak incident where there is head contact, and we can't take that out of the game. That happens in sports, that aren't predominantly about to tackle. Even GA, there can be a head clash, etc. But at the moment, in my opinion, players haven't adapted quickly enough, and they're still trying to target here, which is nipple height. You start targeting there, you've very little room for error, and there needs to be a stronger policing of it across the board until players change.
Like the 5-0-1, like he comes off the bench, he clearly wants to make an impact on the game. You can see in the previous couple of contacts he makes, he's in a similar area. And I understand that you want to make an impact physically. I have to say, I enjoy when people make big tackles and physically dominate their opponent. It's part of the game. But he can absolutely be lower than he is on the Dan Sheehan one, where he's hitting up towards an area that's dangerous. Same with Nell, like he knows he's going in high there. The Nell one is interesting though, because the framework, and the referees and the TMO talked through it. The framework allowed them to kind of reach that decision, even though I agree with you, Birch, like it's really dangerous how he flew in there. But I suppose there's the kind of either out for referees in those instances. And by the letter of the framework, I can actually understand how they came to that decision. You can see the very initial point of contact is on Fitzgerald's shoulder. And one of the things, the cues that the match officials and committees and the disciplinary panels have been given is if the player's head jolts forward first, then they've been kind of led to understand that that's body contact first. Whereas obviously if the head goes backwards first, it's been straight to the head. So there's those little cues there. And actually I was reading through the Lavanini disciplinary report from back in November, the hit on Keane Healy, which was really delayed in putting up. And they actually used that specific wording, there's been precedent with head jolting forward first, and that's not a direct head contact, but it doesn't make it not unbelievably dangerous in terms of that Nell hit. He's really high. And again, I understand what he's trying to do. He's trying to go and make a spot tackle, stop the ball, physically dominate his opponent, but he can do that a few inches lower and still get a really good outcome in that tackle.
Kind of reminds me of some of the spotlight that's been put on head injury in boxing, to be honest. Similar to rugby, and in fact, in a far more concentrated way, head trauma is always going to be an occupational hazard for boxing. I mean, it's the raison d'etre, right? But in terms of mitigating against it, say, a lot of people believe that fighters take most of the damage in the ring over the 12 rounds we see on a Saturday night on our TVs, but like a lot of the damage is done in sparring as well. And I know Steve Thompson made this point about training, but equally, like, people think, oh, if you're sparring wearing a head guard, it protects you from most head injuries, and like really doesn't, because it doesn't prevent your brain from being rattled around your skull. And very similarly, if you're getting smashed marginally to the shoulder first and then nearly getting the head taken off you, like, is that all that different to just having direct contact of the head? Like, to my complete novice mind, no, you know what I mean? And it kind of reminds me as well of the conversation that we used to have about spear tackles in rugby, whereby if you dropped a guy on his shoulder, there was sufficient mitigation there that you wouldn't be sent off. Whereas if he landed on his head, it was a red card. Not that you would any real control over that outcome either way when you're tipping a guy over, you know, and it just feels as though the mitigation is circumstantial, and like the overriding sense is that most of these hits are actually just extremely dangerous. And when you see people talking about the game going soft, or what's happening to this great physical game that we used to play, like shut up, right? Have you seen the size of some of these men and the force with which some of these women are carrying the ball into each other? You don't need tackles at shoulder height for a game to have edge, you know what I mean? And if you feel as though the game is becoming depleted as a spectator, like, tough shit, to be honest. Like, I still think it's great, right? But in 30 years' time, if some of these players aren't able to pick up their grandkids, you're not going to be there explaining to their grandkids why granddad or granny can't pick you up, or, you know, it's actually not about you. Like, you know, it's not your health, it's their health. And I understand completely how players within the game, even in that knowledge, are frustrated by it. But I wonder, is it still too vague, Bernard, in terms of how the laws are written, in terms of how they're being subjectively interpreted?
Yeah, look, I think the problem is, even when you speak to pro referees, they're not of the same opinion, because they're confused. I mean, you know, I spoke to some referees who didn't think the Craig Gilroy was red. I spoke to others who thought it was a stone cold red, and obviously the citing committee, you know, felt it was a red, if I'm right, Murray. So like that, this is the problem. And these are people whose sole job is to, like, the professional referees. But I'm not blaming them in this situation. I just think that across the board, there's a lack of protection and support from World Rugby, where even if a referee makes a mistake, but he's erring on the side of player safety, that World Rugby need to support them. I think at the moment they feel that they could be hung out to dry. You know, if they red card somebody who shouldn't be red card, and of course, you know, a nation would be up in arms if there's a red card that's technically not a red card, right? And the referee would have to carry that for the next couple of years. But and I think at the moment they're feeling that pressure to be totally 100% sure. And I know, look, there was a red card against Ireland, but I think there's actually more missed than there's punished. And look, the thing about the game being physical, the game is way more physical now than it was 2 years ago. You know, these players are absolute warriors. But and you know, we can have lots of physicality without high shots. You know, that's not a test of physicality. And I would say, you know, going back to your point about training and boxers, you know, teams are doing what, you know, 16 minutes or whatever of bone on bone a week. Some are doing less. Like, I've been coaching in that level and played. There's no high shots in that, you know what I mean? Because players are to have care for their teammates, you know what I mean? And yes, it is a physical, absolutely. They absolutely smash each other because you've first against seconds or whatever you have, you know. So there's no lack of intent, but they're very careful. And you know, coming off the bench because you want to make an impact at your opposite number running at you, yeah, okay, we understand. But at the end of the day, you have a duty of care. And also, I think at the moment, like, as far as I remember, I know there's more red cards than before, but red cards can change a game. Wales won at Six Nations, you could argue, last year because the opposition had red cards. You know, Wales went out of a World Cup because Warburton got a spear tackle, but that's the drama of sport. You know what I mean? Like, I felt coming out of Eve on Saturday, on Sunday, there was a lot of people who were saying, "Oh, I paid my money. I deserve a contest." You know what I mean? And like, the reality was, it probably needed to happen to Ireland, that Ireland made a 13 first to have a contest. You know what I mean? But like, that's sport. You know, Italy might win their first game in donkey's years because someone loses a hooker with injury, they lose a hooker to a red card, and they have to go 13 men, and that'll give Italy a boost, and everyone go, wow, did you see the game, the drama, etc. Just because the game followed the pattern we expected it to follow in terms of the scoring, but we felt, Italy don't have a fighting chance because they're 13. I don't think is a reason to bag the rules, and I know people are frustrated by the scrum rule. But like, I've seen this manipulated in the past, where teams have had a dominant scrum, the opposition lose 2 front rows, and they go on contested, and you only go to 14, and they've been competitive. They maybe won the match because they've only 14. So that's not, rugby union is supposed to be a game for all shapes and sizes, and I know the scrum pisses people off, but it's a legitimate way of winning games. It's a very strong part of why rugby union is different than rugby league, and teams who spend a lot of time coaching, working on their scrum, finding new talent, should get the reward of that, in my opinion. So look at it. It ruined the game to a certain extent, but it was brought in for a reason, and I don't think we should just expect to manipulate the rules and regulations to make sure we all get a contest every time. It's the drama and the jeopardy of sport that outside factors can influence results. So that's my opinion on it, and particularly as well, like, no, the referee shouldn't have the worry about, I'm going to ruin the contest, if he's given a red card, if it's an act of dangerous play and foul play. So I think sometimes we forget that, and it's we need to think about it.
Yeah, like Faiva is culpable in that instance. Just to jump back, and I know we want to move on, Gav, on the head contact process, which was formerly the framework. We do need a process like that there, because rugby is such an area, such a sport of grey areas. Like, even this week, World Rugby's Rugby Committee couldn't make a definitive ruling on whether Johnny May's try against Italy in the corner was legal. I know it's a different issue, but like, the very board of the sport at the highest level don't know for sure whether that was a try, it seems. So we do need a definitive process for this kind of stuff. Otherwise, referees are in an even more difficult position. Like, is that dangerous? Yeah, you're gone. It will be a really large grey area at that stage. But just like going through the head contact process, question 4 is there mitigation? And right alongside it says mitigation will not apply for intentional or highly reckless acts of foul play. And I think probably a lot can go under that, highly reckless, where you have no awareness of the danger and consequences to the other person. Because as you've just described, the danger and consequences can be really, really damaging and long lasting. So there is that there for referees as well in the process. And the Baird one, finally, because I know loads of people have been talking about it and discussing it. It is a fascinating one. It would be great to know from the deciding commissioner's point of view what he saw there and didn't see, because all we have is one angle where I've slowed it right down. I've paused at each little point. You can't say for certain what has happened there. Baird is kind of standing still. He's not hitting into the tackle. It's just not clear. There's obviously different angles there. They've obviously seen enough, both the TMO on the day and the deciding commissioner since, not to cite that as a dangerous, reckless high tackle. So it'd be good for us all maybe to have a bit of insight into that. We don't get a chance to interview deciding commissioners and those kind of people behind the scenes. That's just not part of the process, but it would probably be helpful, because otherwise everyone goes away now thinking that Ireland were absolutely blessed and that Ryan Baird got away with something, when potentially that wasn't even the case at all.
Yeah, it's not that they're hiding anything. Excuse me. It's not that they're hiding anything, but more transparency from them would be welcomed. I'm not even sure if they have the capacity really to explain their decisions or anything like that, but even a framework for that would be beneficial for sure, wouldn't it? Just to have it all out in the open and giving people more information. We do need to move on. Birch, we wanted to talk about France, and not only their very formidable national team, but the makeup of it, the ethnic diversity within it. And I know you were keen to get into some of your experiences of that down in France as well.
Yeah, so it's just something that maybe people don't know a huge amount about, but there's been a massive focus, and there's been an increased influence of the players from French Polynesia, and some of it is, it's not new in French rugby. I mean, Willie Taufania, who's Roman and Ben Taufania's father, played for Grenoble. He's a legend in Grenoble. He played in a top 16 final. He played sometimes in the back row or sometimes centre, but he joined the French army from New Caledonia. He conscripted. He was based near Grenoble. Grenoble was an amateur club, and so he joined Grenoble and became a huge influence on the club. And some of the club's best times in history were built around with him being the hard man and the go forward guy. And obviously, then Roman and Ben have both had interesting careers. The lad's cousin is now Donovan is a winger for Racing, having come through Claremont, and the reality is it's not like going to Samoa or Fiji or Tonga and bringing those kids into your academies, which has happened in France, and we did it in Grenoble, but it's a much easier transition for them because they speak French. Their clubs are registered members of the French Federation. So, and basically what you're getting is Polynesians who are French, and it just, we know Polynesians are incredible athletes. Their influence has gone from, not just being dominant in rugby league and rugby union to being a big part of the NFL now, and there's been a big spike in Polynesian players playing in the NFL because they're effectively, ideal for that anaerobic sport, where big focus on power, footwork, etc. So, and it's interesting. We could see that there was so Grenoble. We were competing with Lyon and Bourgoin for the best young talent in their own Alps, and Bourgoin obviously have gone down the ranks, but they were when I joined Grenoble, they'd just been knocked out of top 14. They were obviously there used to be a top 6 club in the top 14 every year, and we're always in the Champions Cup, but didn't target it, so they took the piss a bit. But a very rich academy, a lot of really good players from Bourgoin had gone on to play for France, etc. And so we found it hard to get into them. We also had historically we'd had financial problems, so we got thrown down to Federal 1 in the 2000s because the club went into administration. So that's not a good thing when you're trying to recruit young players, when they say, hang on, you could go bankrupt next yeare. So Bourgoin and Lyon were probably on a better financial footing. So we looked to try and tour New Caledonia for pre-season to basically look at it. We wouldn't have found a competitive game there, but just to go down and do a training camp, build a relationship with some of the local clubs, the local coaches, to try and have that as some kind of maybe set up an academy down there. Now it didn't happen. We didn't have the money to fly there, but we were doing some webinars with some of the local coaches. We did try and tap into it, and there's a guy. There's basically a guy in Racing Metro, Michele. You're better with the pronunciation than me, Murray. How would you pronounce it?
Tugahala,
yeah. So Michele basically, actually, there's a very good film on Netflix called Mercenary, and look, it's not high production in terms of spend, but it gives you an insight into. And Michele plays the player. There's French Polynesians dotted throughout all aspects of French rugby, where they come to France to try and make a living. They send money home, similar to the Fijians, Samoans, and Tongans, and it's some way it's sad because they come for economic reasons, but in other ways it's positive because they can make a better life for themselves, and they can, earn enough money to support family back home. So I'm not sure if it's good or bad, to be honest. But when you see someone like Roman Taufania or Mo Fana or Mo Vaca, get to play for France and the financial benefits that come with making it all the way to the top, I think it's something worth noting. And it kind of, the French rugby team have nearly tapped into every single ethnic group in France at the moment. And obviously it's a highly populated country, and I think that this team, obviously they're pretty decent on the pitch, but they certainly have grasped attention of all areas of French sport. It's not an upper class sport in France, or even mid class sport. It's now become a game for everybody, which I think is phenomenal. And even that area. Woki grew up in the area, the suburb where Stade de France is, and it's a tough area. You know, it's not an area that you would like to be alone, you know, late at night, and it's not an area that was ever targeted was ever full of rugby clubs. But you know, it's starting to pick up players from all parts of France, rich and poor, which is brilliant, I think.
Has there been a concerted effort on that front, Birch, or has it traditionally always been a game for everybody and we're just seeing more people competing in it now? Like, has there been a shift from it being a little bit elitist?
No, yeah, it has shifted because, particularly Paris. I mean, Paris and Marseille. So Marseille was a soccer city, Paris was a soccer city, but it was a great club, Massy, who haven't had where, you know, Macalou and I think Bastero came from. They haven't been able to hold on to the players, right? But they have been a really good club at going into the suburbs of Paris and finding these kids who want to play rugby and sending them bus in, giving them food after training, giving them kit, training them. I mean, you know, so we had a guy, Mamadou Diaby. He plays for Bordeaux now, and he was a kickboxer. No rugby in his apartment block in Paris. No rugby in his family. He saw a match on TV and he goes, "Oh, I'm strong." Gusto is powerful. Like, he's a very strong boy. He goes, "I'm strong. I could play rugby." So he rang Stade Francais and they said, "Look, we don't do trials. Like, you haven't played rugby before." And then he rang them the following year and they said, "Look, we're actually doing physical testing." And he went in, and his vertical jump, his bench press, his clean was so good. They actually gave him a contract, right? And then they were like, "This fella can't." After a while, the coach was like, "We don't have time to train this guy how to catch a ball, how to tackle." So he ended up kind of going to Racing, and then Racing put him on loan to Oyonnax, where Christophe Urios spent a lot of time trying to teach him, but he wasn't the finished product yet. And he came off the bench against us in a match, and like, he was just special in terms of what he could do athletically. So I managed to get him out of Oyonnax. Racing weren't really worried about him because look, they don't have time to develop these guys. They're about performance, but we had time and we didn't have much money, so we had to take a chance. He did really well for us, and then we sold him to Bordeaux, where he's been captain. He hasn't been far out. I thought he would have got capped for France, but he's just missed that boat. There's so many really good French back rows now, but he was talked about as a potential there. But my point is, Massy, and the reason it's come up is Biarritz have sold their two best young forwards to Stade Francais for €1 million, they reckon. That's not just about the players being under contract. That's about the indemnity you pay a club if you take somebody who's been formed. So they call it a centre formation. So basically, if you've been formed in that club, there's a strict criteria about how much you pay. That's what we sold Thomas Jomes to La Rochelle. But because he played 7 top 14 games for us, because he'd been in our academy for 3 years, because he played French under 20s, there's a way of calculating his value, right? And again, people might say, "Oh, that's just that." You know, you're treating players as assets. It's actually they are assets, right? And the time you spend investing in them in the French system can basically pay for the next generation, because the super rich clubs who are chasing silverware and who have bigger budgets and all that stuff, they now have to compensate you for the development you've made. So Massy's business now is, you know, finding really good young talent, spending time with them, and when you get a Woki or a Bastero or a Macalou, you get cash in the bank, which goes back into, you know, sending the bus into a suburb an hour away on a Tuesday night to pick up a load of under 14s who want to play rugby, bring them to the club, feeding them, you know. So I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing because Biarritz will get the financial benefit of having created these players. Obviously, it'd be far better for Biarritz if they had the financial wherewithal to stay in the top 14 and to keep those players. But if you don't, you know, it doesn't punish the player. The player gets to play for a club who has a chance of silverware. He gets a better contract. But as I said, the most important thing is money goes back in to the grassroots inadvertently through that transfer fee. And it feeds fuels the desire to create the next generation. Because I think if you build players and develop players, you get no compensation, you lose motivation, and the club maybe start to cut back on the money they're willing to spend on development. So I think it's just something that maybe people don't see, but it's become part of French rugby. Transfers have been in the game for a while. Very rare that we hear about them properly. But it's now become common practice in France, and I think it's not a bad thing.
Yeah, Murray, it's Matthew Irigoyen and Lucas Persblanc, I think, are off to Stade for £1 million, Midi Olympique, reporting that during the week, just closer to home, because look, it's great for those two lads. They're getting a move to the very, very top level. But I think you were on a call with Cian Prendergast during the week. Were you on that personally? I should have checked. And he was very interesting about himself, about his brother. And equally, we see Shea O'Brien joining Ulster after impressing in the IIL for City of Armagh. Different sorts of pathways, but it's honestly just good to see different sort of stories emerging of players making it to the top level, or hopefully in O'Brien's case, compared to the conventional route that we all know about.
Yeah, and even Aaron Hare, the Shannon scrum half, going into Munster for short term as well. I think it's brilliant to have different, like Birch mentioned, diversity there in a different way. Players who've come towards senior professional rugby in different ways. I think the backgrounds and diversity of those can contribute really massively to a good environment. As we said, with Frank Bradshaw Ryan having a different experience over in the Pro D2, learning about rugby in a very different way. The Prendergast one was just fascinating. I thought he spoke really well. He's obviously been a massively impressive figure this season. He gets better every single game. He's only 22. His output is really impressive across the board, all areas of the game. And I suppose he kind of had a quick turnaround, really. He got a call from Noel McNamara during the lockdown, April 2020, saying there was no spot for him in the Leinster Academy. And 2 days later, Connacht Academy boss Eric Elwood calls him and says, "Do you want to come down?" He said he had said yes before Elwood even finished the sentence. Such was his eagerness to get across. And he's a brilliant example of, there's so many players who probably miss out on Leinster Academy who have a lot to offer, because, as we said, the funnel gets so tight there in terms of going up to Leinster. It's one of the strengths of their system. But Prendergast is a brilliant player. I think he's going to play for Ireland. I think it's fantastic that Irish rugby was alert and aware to it, and Connacht pounced and gave him an opportunity, because he, and you know him, Bert, you know his background. He is really impressive character. His parents were in the army, and you can see probably traits in terms of his work ethic and his desire just to play straight away. He went down and he wasn't thinking about being in the academy and being a young guy. He wanted to play straight away. And Pete Wilkins, the senior coach, said he basically demanded inclusion, not verbally, but just by the way he went about his business. So I think that's a great success story. And there's been a number of other guys like that who have obviously gone to other provinces, mainly out of Leinster, obviously, and done really well. I think that's fantastic to see. The Shea O'Brien one, again, really good, really positive for the AIL. A young guy who's been impressing with City of Armagh. We want to ensure that the league in Ireland is a really viable route. And it has been, I mean, we kind of touched on it last week, but it has been brilliant to see the kind of renewed energy, I think, around the league. Obviously, the lack of rugby has in the last 2 seasons has led to that, but there's just so much enthusiasm out there. There's so much energy in the coaching and development of players, and to see guys like that stepping up is just absolutely wonderful. Himself and Hare, and you'd hope that they'll get in there and grab their opportunities and really impress, because they have something different to bring. They haven't gone through the exact same route as other guys through academy, been stars all the way along, but they can have different skill sets and different viewpoints on things. So I think it's a brilliant part of the game. Even the France thing excites me so much, that there's a diverse squad there. It excites the French people as well, which is really, really apparent when you're at Stade de France. The last day, the fans have really grasped onto that team, because they represent the nation. They really do. There's all different strands to France, so many. It's a fascinating country, and the rugby team is really representing that, as well as being really good on the pitch. But I think there's still a way to go in Irish rugby with that kind of diversity. We've spoken about it before. And I think it's good that different guys from different strands and avenues are coming into the pro game.
Bert, you have some breaking transfer news for us, by all accounts.
It's not breaking, but I think I agree with Murray. I mean, like, you have to give credit to Cian Prendergast as well, because he was doing a degree in UCD. He's a bright kid. He had to be willing to take that rejection of of not making the Leinster Academy and pivot to a new course in UCG and back themselves and go in there and make an incredible impression. Yeah, like his uncle is Garvin Ware, who was a very good footballer for Wicklow and Éire Óg. And I think it's the big thing is his mentality. His mum and dad have a leadership company. He's a born leader, and so is his younger brother Sam, who's in the Leinster Sub Academy, an out half, who's, for me, and having worked with him, is the most like out half that I've seen for a while to Sexton in terms of his ability to influence others. So, you got two very talented young players, and it'd just be interesting, will Prendergast, will there be room for Sam in Leinster, or will he have to travel as well? Because he's going to make it as a pro, there's no doubt. And yeah, it's great to see a guy who has the rejection just bounce back, and 2 years later he's in an Irish squad, okay, as a development player, but ahead of probably 5 or 6 lads who were deemed better than him, 2 years ago, and that's what you want. I think Connacht, I think a great win for Connacht against the Stormers and obviously the Scarlets, because they needed to win those 2 games, and I think they're going to be strengthened next year. I believe Peter Dooley and Adam Byrne will be heading west, and obviously Josh Murphy. So it's great to get the really good young talent that other provinces miss out on, but it's also nice to be able to bring in players who have 50, 60, 70 pro or URC games. Adam Byrne is international, and I think that'll give them a big boost as well. And I totally support, I know other provinces have to cut their budget, but if Connacht had to cut their budget this year significantly because of financial implications of COVID, I think you would take their competitiveness away. So I don't know what their budget is, but I'm certainly heartened to see players of the quality of Dooley and Byrne going down there if that does happen, which I believe it will.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we want in Irish rugby. Those 2 guys have the potential to be even better than they are. Adam Burns obviously played for Ireland, as you say, and he's shown real glimpses of it since he got back from a really tough time with injury. You want to keep a guy like that in the Irish system, and I suppose there has been a reluctance that we've had to break down around those interprovincial moves, and obviously Nusafora, to his, in fairness to him, has really pushed it, and he's had resistance with it, and he's had to fight back at times. And Leinster obviously get frustrated and stuff with younger players potentially, and guys they have in their kind of depth chart for the future. But it is a positive for Irish rugby. Like those 2 transfers, 3 with Josh Murphy, that could make Connacht just a much better team, as you say, with senior figures like that, as well as the bargains that they're picking up around the transfer market. It's been good to see Leva Fafita really showing what he's about. Even Tia Tuimonga has been really good covering both sides of the scrum. Obviously, like Mac Hansen comes in under the radar and is now an Ireland international as well. So that kind of recruitment is really positive as well. But you're bang on. You need those kind of senior figures as well. And it all adds up, doesn't it?
Hansen under some people's radar anyway. Connacht are away to Edinburgh this weekend.
Never did that down, Murray.
No, do you know what?
It was bad. It was my worst moment.
It was our worst.
No, do you know what? In all seriousness, though, because of those 3 players that you mentioned that are moving to Connacht, like what was most impressive to me about their victory over the Stormers was the impact off the bench. It's not an original point. It was well flagged afterwards, but like the bench actually forced them over the line in that game and got the job done. And how many times have we had the conversation this season about their comparable lack of depth, or their lack of depth comparable to the other provinces, and how that's probably held them back at key moments in key games. You think of Leicester, Stade, and so on. So when you have those reinforcements coming in, I'd imagine from Andy Friend's point of view, Birch, like it must be such an exciting prospect to be doing very well at the moment, to be 6th in the table. You're travelling to 5th place Edinburgh, but also knowing there are reinforcements coming over the horizon.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that cost them in Europe in the last 2 rounds, where they had a mixture of injuries and COVID, and they were just like threadbare on the bench. But I think what we saw at the weekend was when they have a little bit of luck in terms of availability. I think they've got 25 players at the moment who, there's absolutely no worries about bringing them, starting them or bringing them on. I think then they have probably 15 players who they're in the development stage, and they need to get that game time, the time in the saddle to show whether they're good enough or not. But when you sign a Josh Murphy or an Adam Byrne or Peter Dooley, there's no development with them. They're developed, they're ready to go, they'll have a point to prove, and I think that's the safety net you want. So for Connacht, probably it's to have 30 guys who are 2 in every position who you're totally comfortable with. They're still going to have a massive role in developing talent, because that's just the nature of where they are in the pecking order. And I think Andy Friend and Peter Wilkins and Mossy Lawler, etc. They know that, and they accept that. But it's great to see them have what looks like on paper a fighting chance, and I think that's getting that way, which is great.
So it was good, Gav, just to see them come back to win a game, like a reversal of the roles that we talked about in January, where they were in a really tough situation. The Stormers had some really nice purple patches, I suppose, in that game. And as you say, they finished strongly over the top, having picked a bench that had, Caelan Blade, Ireland international, Conor Oliver, one of the most impressive performers this season. And everyone else on the bench had done well this season. It was, as you say, you've kind of changed the view of the bench at times, and you're selecting guys there who can really help you over the line rather than just be potential replacements for injuries, as it maybe was in the past. It was good selection as well in terms of how they picked the 23. But I thought it was fantastic that they come from behind and show that kind of grit. And the Tom Daly try just underlined what they can do in attack. It was absolutely outstanding, and they continue to be a joy to watch in that sense. Guys like Tom Daly, he's one who kind of went under the radar from Leinster to Connacht and has been so important over the last 2 seasons. So great to see them back into that kind of form, and long may it continue.
Absolutely. Birch, will they get the job done in Edinburgh over the weekend? Tough ask.
Yeah, tough ask. In fairness to Edinburgh, I think they were poor against Leinster. They played a bit better against Munster, but were quite sloppy ball in hand. I think Edinburgh have, they've really invested in that second string, brought in quite a few foreign players to cover when they lose, 14, 15 players to the Welsh or to the Scottish squad. So it won't be easy, but it should be a great game. Actually, both teams like to play, and I think Connacht will fancy their chances of getting a win, given that they had a very good away win, the Scarlets. So it's probably, for me, that's probably the game of the weekend in terms of how both teams are going to throw it around.
Call it, Murray.
Edinburgh I think it'll be a brilliant match, but yeah, Edinburgh at home, I'll go siding with them.
That's 25-8 on Friday. At the same time, Ulster host Cardiff. Should be business as usual, you'd imagine, Birch.
Yeah, I think I like Cardiff, actually. I like how they're developing under Dai Young. Very good set piece, very good scrum. Their kicking game against Leinster, if anyone wants to look back and see where potentially how you play against Leinster, look at the variety and the accuracy of Cardiff's kicking game. They found grass on countless occasions, got the ball back regularly, and they were very good at defensive breakdown. So it's a tricky one for. I think the Cardiff and the Ospreys are both. They're very pragmatic in their game plan. I think at the moment Cardiff have probably better players and are capable of doing more damage than the Ospreys. And look at Ulster. Expect Ulster to win, but I think that Cardiff are on an upward curve as well, and it could be a tight match.
You do get that impression with Cardiff. I think they're 12th in the table, Murray, but it doesn't feel representative of where they are, or maybe it is representative of where they are and just not where they would appear to be going.
Yeah, they're close to being where they want to be, and there's so many good elements to their game, but definitely a game that Ulster should win, in my opinion. They've got the influx of guys back from release from Ireland camp. Henderson hopefully making his return. Hume and Balakoon, your game breakers, which Ulster have probably relied on a bit, and that's a good thing to rely on, is backs who can break open a game and provide those difference-making moments with ball in hand. Those two guys have done it repeatedly. Nick Timoney's back as well, so I think they'll be a strong enough Nick to win that one. Just
very quickly, lads, and a reminder to everybody that we will be talking about these games first thing on Monday for the 42 members, but Leinster away to Benetton, that's 5-1 on Saturday, and then Munster at home to Dragons at 5:15 on the same day. Call them both for us there, Murray, before we wrap.
I think Leinster win. I've enjoyed watching them. Sorry, I know you want a quick one here, but I thought it was brilliant to see the Lions actually give them a tough test last weekend. It's exactly what we wanted from the South African team. So that was brilliant to see. Some really good young players. Joe McCarthy standing out again, and you'll hope he'll continue to get minutes next season when Jenkins is in there. Max O'Reilly I thought was really good, and Osborne and Scott Penny is just a remarkably good player for 22. So I think Leinster will win that one, and the Munster one, yeah, I'd back them as well in that.
Yeah, just on Joe McCarthy, watch out for his younger brother, tight head for Blackrock College. He's been the most impressive tight head I've seen. I know Leo was watching the game, and there's big raps on him. Really physical, like like Joe, but just a shorter version and a tighter prop. He's one to watch. So, and I agree. I think the South Africans, they're going to be an unbelievably good addition to this URC next year. I mean, the Sharks have signed the Jager now. They've signed Sadie, who's that massive tight prop who played for the Lions and caused all kinds of problems for Leinster scrum. So he's moving to the Sharks. Am has just re-signed. He's obviously going to Japan for 2 months, but he's going to be there. Khaleesi. I know the Lions are looking at their roster for next year, and they just came to the RDS and just played, and actually they lured Leinster into Leinster got quite chaotic as well, and kind of took them out of sync a little bit, and that's exactly what Leinster need. I mean, too often, and Munster as well, and Ulster, sometimes those URC games used to be a formality, and they just go through it at 80%, and because they're dominant in terms of personnel. But I think as this competition grows, those South African URC teams are going to come and really test us in ways that we only usually get exposed to at the deep end in Europe. So really positive to see how they're starting to develop and become accustomed to Northern Hemisphere rugby.
If I can have one last word on Munster, Gav, there's a piece on their website which is really encouraging. It's with Ian Costello, the academy boss. And normally, there's not that much in those kind of releases, but there's a bit of detail around what they're doing down the pipeline, working with players who've been knocked out of the senior cup, getting them in camps, adding the other guys in after that. They're doing position-specific skill sessions with loads of coaches there, and obviously club players, an under-17 session or match, I think they mentioned in UL as well. It's great to hear about that kind of stuff. There's a new, what do they call it, Centre of Excellence, isn't it, Birch, in Feathered, to have better facilities as well for the province. And it is something we'll probably come back to again, I've discussed around Munster's development pathways. But I just thought it was excellent to hear about that good work being done there, given the players that are coming through, and hopefully lots more of them to come.
Yeah, talking to a friend of mine who's a schools coach and an AIL coach, he mentioned the exact same thing to me over the weekend and how impressed he was by Costello, but also how Costello has sort of not reintroduced it. I think it was always there, but really put an emphasis on it, and it's properly run. And you just said it's unbelievably beneficial to the players that this particular coach is working with. It is something we'll come back to. We will come back as well.
Just on that, just to finish on that, I think that's absolutely brilliant. And sorry, I know we all want to talk about it, but I think Costello's CV and the job he did when the lads were stuck in South Africa, he could easily be a contender for a job with the senior team again. But I think it's so important that they hang on to him now. He knows it from before he went away. He's obviously experienced different things in England, both as a head coach in the Championship and then obviously as a part of the WASP coaching team. And I think that position, he could have an influence on Munster for the next 20 years. And I know it depends on what he wants to do, but I think he's already made a massive start in a difficult time with COVID and things like that.
Listeners think that I'm trying to rush the two of you off the call. Like it's you who has to go, Birch. I could sit here all day. Boys, thank you as always. I want to say a serious thank you as well to everybody who's tuned in over the last 3 years. It's been so much fun. I think we've said most of it already, but just to reiterate how much it's meant to us that you've kind of followed us along this way, and to thank you as well for all of your contributions, your emails, your tweets, your questions, be it in the members WhatsApp group or on the street or whatever. It's been amazing. We'll be back on Monday. We're going to chat about all of the weekend's action for the 42 members. A reminder, as I mentioned at the very top of the show, there's a 20% discount if you sign up to become a member between now and Monday's show. And it's members.the42.ie, and the promo code is the 42 or W. All caps, all one word. That's us. Back on Monday. Mind yourselves in the meantime. Take it easy.
Thanks, guys. See you Monday. Bye-bye.